Thank you. Thank everybody for coming out tonight. I know you could have been anywhere else, but you decided to be here with us, and I really appreciate that. Thank you, Apostle, for just opening up the house for a class that is so needed in this time that we're in right now. I know this is a hard topic. I will not lie. This is a hard topic. It stirs up lots of emotion. Even creating the class, it stirred up emotions for me. So as we go today, let's be gentle to each other. Let's be mindful for what's in the room. Let's protect each other. And one thing I want to discuss before we get into the PowerPoint slides, any moment that you feel overwhelmed with emotion, it's okay. It is okay. But don't push those emotions down. It's an urgency to bring that stuff up today. So if you get overwhelmed with emotion, flooded today, use this simple tool right here. It's so simple. Just breathe. Take a deep breath and breathe. Go in through your nose and out through your mouth. Let's do it right now to open it up. Take a deep breath in through our nose. Breathing creates relaxation in our bodies. Our nervous system is constantly moving and activating. Just breathing calms us down. We're able to rationalize. We're able to hear and think just when we breathe. So I get flooded with emotion today, go to your breathing. Sorry. So what we're going to do in the class today, we got objectives. We're going to go somewhere. We're going somewhere today. So our objectives for today is, one, we're going to define grief. We're going to know what grief looks like and what it is. We're going to conceptualize it. We're going to understand it fully. And we're going to know how it impacts us and how it impacts us in a way that it slows us down. We're going to understand that when you leave today. We're going to understand the 5 stages of grief. There are 5 stages that we go through in grief. And sometimes there are stages that we make up because grieving is personalized. It's not a book that can define grief. You're your own book. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. And lastly, we're going to review strategies. We're going to equip you to walk out here and deal with the grief that you're dealing with. What is grief? When we look at grief, we look at it as our reaction, our response to the loss that we're enduring. That's a physical response. That's a cognitive response. That's an emotional response. That's a behavioral response. That's a spiritual response. How does it look in a physical response? That could be tightness in my chest. That could be isolation. I don't want to be around nobody. I just want to go through my own way. Emotional grieving look like? What is that response? Sadness, crying, multitude of emotions constantly, flooded of emotion. What does it look like when we go through behavioral? What does our behaviors look like when we're grieving? We're isolated. We're not doing much movement, or we're doing lots of movement to avoid the pain. I'm just going to let that lay down there. So I feel like it needs to lay down. And spiritually, what it looks like when we're grieving. Spiritually, it looks like sometimes we back away from God. Because God, I don't understand why. Why did I have to endure this at this time in my life? So instead of gaining faith, we move away from faith. But in understanding grief, we have to understand that grief, there's 2 losses when you're grieving. Next slide. There's 2 losses that we experience when we grieve. There's a primary loss. Then there's a secondary loss. When there's a primary loss, let's, for example, I lose my husband. That's a primary loss. My secondary loss is, what did it mean to me to lose my husband? I lost my provision. I lost my partner, the one that I envisioned that I was going to do life with. So now I'm experiencing 2 losses at the same time, but I'm only really seeing the first loss because I'm stuck in my emotions of now my husband is not here. I dream with him. I envision life with him. Now I have to learn something very hard. How do I dream again while I have a hole within my soul? Ain't that really hard? Think about it. Because you lose so much when you grieving. I lost my identity because now if it was my spouse or my mother or my daughter or my son, that was part of my identity. When we introduce ourselves sometimes, we say, I always say, I catch myself, you know my brother Irvin? I always say that, like, because he played basketball, so I always introduce myself by who I know. So now I lost part of my identity because of that loss. Next slide. What we're going to talk about now is how we respond to our grief. Grief response depends on a lot of factors. Let's look at this right here for a minute. We go through I hope you guys can see it. We go through 8 developmental stages in life. The first stage is infant. Then we go to toddler, preschool, grade school, teenage, which is a really tough year, right? Young adult, middle-aged adult, and older adult. When we experience loss, we got to think about all what we experience in life. In our infant age, that's when we first learn something really big. We learn about trust. We learn if I can trust the person that is going to provide for me, or there's a mistrust that I have for that person because they weren't consistently there for me. If you have developed mistrust, that's going to be a factor you're going to have to think about while you're grieving. Because now the person that I lost bought trust to me, and now that's no longer there. So these factors contribute to our response and how we deal with grief. And we learn effectively how to cope when we deal with not just the bereavement, but we deal with the underlying issues too. Because there's a lot of underlying wounds that we endure as life goes, day to day. Our next slide talks about the types of grief. So there's the first type is anticipatory grief. That is the grief that we go through slowly. That's when our loved one is still alive. We're seeing them slowly pass away. Some say this grief is easier, but I would argue that because when you see your family members slowly slip away, they're helpless, they're slowly losing their form, that right there is hurtful while they're alive. And then when they finally pass away, that's another level of grief there. That's another level of pain that we must experience. So there is no easy grief. There's no easy way to grieve. There's no easy way to endure the pain of losing someone. The second type is a normal grief, which a lot of us fall in the gap of normal grief. But because pain is so unbearable and we're not used to it, we feel like this should not be. This should not be the norm of how things is. But most of the time we fall in the gap of normal grief. Complicated grief, the types are disenfranchised. Disenfranchised grief, this is when, let's first say, you were in a relationship with somebody and you weren't the wife or the girlfriend, you were unknown. This is the type of grief when you can't socially, it doesn't fit in the social realm for you to grieve because you weren't acknowledged as someone important to that person. No one knew about you. It's like, if I could just say plainly, if you was a side chick or something like that, if you was a side chick and then you were dating someone and they passed away, that's that disenfranchised grief. You have to grieve secretly. And also, let's say if you had a miscarriage, those types of griefs are disenfranchised because people don't expect you to feel the pain that you're feeling because you lost your baby. There is pain that happens when miscarriages take place. We have to remember that. That is a grieving time that you must endure because that's a loss. Anytime there is any loss, you must grieve. Chronic grief. These are the normal reactions that do not subside. So if you lose someone and you're not making any progress, that's when you're falling into the gap of chronic grief, where you're not making time to get back into your normal routine. That's when you're stuck. And that's when I would say it's urgent for you to go talk to somebody. Don't delay. Delayed grief, this is where men fit at in the delayed grief because men, they hide their grief inside and they keep working through it. They're thinking through it, but they're not grieving. So their grief becomes delayed and it acts out in other forms that's secretive for men. So if you are a man and you have experienced loss, create space that you can talk about it and start dealing with the emotions that you feel. Men do feel. It's not unrealistic to say a man feels. They feel. They just got to learn how to bring that stuff up. So society has taught men so long that you're okay. Be strong. Be strong in those hard times. But in reality, they do go through a lot of pain, and you have to begin to have those talks about it. The next one is mass grief. That's when you're a survivor of someone that loved one has passed away, and you begin to mass your grief. You can't even see that you're grieving, and you really are. That's when you need people around you that can call you out and say, hey, I noticed that you're really stuck. You're kind of changing. You're withdrawing. I see a lot of different behaviors that was not there before. And walk them through that process and helping them understand that in the place that they're in. Next slide. All right, so these are the symptoms that come with complicated grief. There's intense longing, yearning for the deceased, intrusive thoughts. These thoughts are all over the place. They're thoughts that are unrealistic, thinking that they're going to come back any day now, things of that nature. Images of the loved ones that you're constantly just thinking of that person. You're denying the loss. Denial. It's a sense of belief that you don't believe that your loved one passed away. These are symptoms that you're in the complicated grief. And you're imagining your loved one is alive. You're searching for that person in unfamiliar places. You have extreme anger or bitterness. This is a big one because when you lose someone, you want to blame. You get into the place of you want to blame everybody else, but not take responsibility and face your reality that, hey, I lost somebody dear to me. Accepting your reality is a big step. Feeling that life is empty or meaningless. When after your loss is experienced and you can't find meaning in life, that's when you get stuck. When you think about complicated grief, think about being stuck. You're not making any movement forward because the pain will be there, but it shall soften up as time goes. And time is something we're going to talk about in a few. But the last one is also remembering the symptoms of depression. Grief is similar to depression, but it's not the same because your grief is around the fact that I lost my loved one. Depression is around other symptoms, usually around suicide, thoughts of worthlessness, things of that nature. So it's a difference there. So sometimes grief can be diagnosed as depression, but it's a misdiagnosis, not the real thing. So if you usually after your loved one passed away, 2 to 3 months, if you go in to see somebody, it's a possibility that they would then diagnose you, but you don't want to take the diagnosis just yet because you want to make sure that your symptoms are around the grief, or have you moved into the depression? What's the other factors that you're looking at? Is it stress related? Is it job related? Is it life related? Make sure it's not just the grieving that you're dealing with. Sorry, I got to take a drink. Sorry. I'm going to go to the next slide. All right, now we're going to look at the stages of grief. We got the first stage. We're going to look at our building blocks here. It's hot up here. It's really hot up here. We're going to look at the stages of grief. So right now we got our first stage, which is denial. This is disbelief, numbness, and that you're in shock. This stage is actually a good stage in the beginning because it helps you accept your reality. It helps you get past and get through what you're actually feeling in the moment. It helps you accept the reality of your truth. It helps you realize, like, wow, I did lose someone. But if you stop in your denial for a moment, it'll help you not necessarily feel so overwhelmed in your emotion. Anger, that's that resentment, that frustration, the out of control, even rage, irritable. You get into the shoulda, coulda stage. Anger, the root of anger is hurt. Remember, your anger is just because you're hurt. It's not necessarily associated with anything anyone did not do. It's associated to anger. Anger. Bargaining. This is when you ruminate, worry, and trying to predict the future. Assume the worst. That's when you're trying to make a deal, pretty much. She's like, girl, you need this fan. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. The next stage is depression. It is when you're in that helpless, hopeless stage. You're trying to change the situation. When in this depression stage, it's not the clinical diagnosed depression stage. It's a different stage. It's when you're feeling the symptoms of depression, that you're feeling the lack of motivation. I can't get up because I'm so sad. Things of that nature. And the last stage is the stage that we all want to get to. That's the radical acceptance. Getting into the place that you accept the reality of your truth. Like, hey, I have lost my loved one, and now it's time for me to proceed from here. We're going to go to the next slide. So action steps. When you're in denial, your action step is give it time, communicate. Get into a place that you can talk about what you're experiencing. Denying gives you time to gradually absorb the news and begin to process it. You have to take the action steps. The next slide. In anger. The next slide. Anger is a power play. Remember, you're pushing people away because you are hurt. You're blaming others as an outlet for your helplessness. We want to make sure that we're not just blaming, we're taking ourselves to the place where we can identify what the loss means to you. I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm afraid, I'm depressed, all these things. Begin to identify what stage you are in. And you need validation. We need people around us in those moments that can tell us, like, it's okay. It's okay to not be okay. We need that validation to take place so we can move out of that stage. We need examinations of the stated beliefs. Sometimes we get into the place we start thinking all or nothing. I lost my spouse or I lost my child because of something I did. Those are cognitive distortions. We start believing the faulty pattern of a lie. It's not true. We want to get into emotional reasoning. We start getting into the place that we cannot rationalize what actually is taking place. Instead, we start also believing things that are not lined up what actually is happening in reality, because in the moment of our that we're grieving, we want somebody to fix our need. We want somebody to fix our pain. And sometimes when we want somebody to fix our pain, we usually start blaming. Make sense? Next slide. I got really hot up here. Thank you. Yeah, I can feel it. Thank you. Oh, this is good. So the next slide is bargaining. And this is when we start making a deal. We're in here, right here in this stage right here. We start trying to make a deal. We get into the stage of maybe I can wake up and it will be a nightmare. I start making up all these facets of these things that may be happening, but in your reality, it is true that this thing did happen. When you're dealing with bargaining, you want to get into your reality and know, hey, this is present. I'm present. This is actually happening. You want to keep reminding yourself, hey, this is actually what's happening right here in this moment. I'm not making it up. You want to recognize how bargaining, this is the stage in bargaining that bargaining exalts you. It takes all your energy. You start feeling fatigued because you cannot get through it. So you start feeling the emotion of being tired all the time. But you have to keep recognizing within yourself, like, hey, this is not based on a dream. This is my reality. I just lost my loved one. Make sense? All right, the next stage, y'all, they lost us. They'll be back. The next stage is depression, our action steps. In this stage, you're going to feel hopeless and helpless. And only way to change hopeless and helpless, you got to make a plan to move out of that place. Making a plan to move out of that place looks like, what can I change from here? What can I change in my present right now in this moment? What can be changed? And when you think about what can be changed, you start making a plan to change. You start living in the moment, making a plan to change. Make sense? And the last stage is acceptance. In acceptance stage, this is the stage that we want to get into. We're starting to recognize, hey, this is my reality. Who I lost is my loved one. How can I start making life work for me from here on? How can I do it? What kind of plans can I make? What can I explore to do differently? How can I make a plan to change for myself? How can I live in the absence of my loss? That's heavy, right? How can I live in the absence of my loss? That's the place that we have to start thinking, because when we lose someone, if we stay in the place of our loss, we're going to stay stagnant, and we want to always try to push forward. And pushing forward can be hard because the person that you wanted to push forward with is not here. Sometimes in our loss, like I said earlier, you lose something more. You lose the person, but you also lose what that person provided for you. I lost my cheerleader. I lost my friend. I lost the one that makes me laugh. Those things you lose, you have to begin to figure out, how can I live in my reality of my truth? Make sense? Take a deep breath. Don't forget to breathe. This is a hard topic, so don't forget to breathe. Stay with me. Let's look at it timetable-wise. When will I start to feel better, Nicole? When will I start to not feel all the pain, the hole in my soul? Time is on you. Time is really on you in this moment, because now you have this relationship with this person that you have lost. Now I have to figure out, how can I solve my pain and not necessarily stay in that same place? Solving my pain and not staying in that same place takes work, and it takes time. Some say within 2 to 3 months, you should be in a place that you're moving out of your routine. But in your reality, I would say at least 1 year, you have to go through all those memories, those birthdays, the anniversary, the holidays. In 1 year, you go through the circle. You feel the pain when the birthday comes. I feel the pain when the anniversary comes. I feel the pain when Christmas comes. You have to feel all those emotions before you can start moving. Things you do in moving forward is going to be in these moments. It's okay to cry out. A cry is powerful in these times. Next slide. Brokenhearted. He heals your wounds. So your pain sets you up to be in the presence of the Lord. Myths around grief. Like our first myth that we just talked about, grief should last about a year. There's no right or wrong time frame for grieving. How long it takes can be different from person to person. Accept your truth in your grieving. If I'm 2 years in, be 2 years in and be okay with that. It's not a bad thing, because the relationship attachment, which we're going to talk about next week, the attachment that you have with this person, it can't be compared to what in losing that person. If I walk with somebody for 20 years and I suddenly lose them, that's going to take me a while to get over. I can't just suddenly wake up in 2 or 3 months and move forward. We're trying to push people out of their pain, but actually their pain is a good place for them to be in that time, because in that pain, you develop some strength that you didn't know you had. You discover your greatest strength in those times if you stay in the process. Don't move out of the process before it's time. Keep emptying out. Keep pouring out as that hole in your soul is healed. Make sense? Moving on with your life means you're forgetting the one you lost. This is a big one. Moving on means you have accepted your loved one's death. This is not the same as forgetting. You create a new life and still keep your loved one memory alive. So keeping your loved one memory alive means I'm not forgetting that my person has passed away. I live on with what that person provided me in my life. So moving on with that person, because you'll never forget what that person provided you. Next, friends can help by not bringing up the subject. that's actually not true, because people who are grieving usually want to talk about their loss. Bringing up the subject can make it easier to talk about. And talk about the good memories. There are good memories with the people that we lost. There's some good things that come in the things that we have lost, and we want to be able to have discussion about it. Next slide. The pain will go away faster if I ignore it. The pain will not go away faster. Trying to ignore your pain or keeping it from surfacing will only make it worse in the long run. For real healing, it is necessary to face your grief and actively deal with it. You can't suppress pain. When you suppress pain, you take no movement forward. We look in this diaphragm that we have right here. You see where we started this? This is pain that we experience over life. You see, like bullying, because most of the time in grade school you have kids that are picking and stuff of that nature. So we may experience bullying. We get in as a teenager, we may experience heartbreak. And as a young adult, we may have family issues like a divorce or something like that. As we get into the middle age, we experience some loss. Maybe we lost like a loved one at that age, and then bereavement and trauma sits in. And when you think about the process, when bereavement hits in, if those things are undealt with, you still have to go back and start dealing with those. Because what grief does is brings up everything within us, and then it causes us to look at the grief, but also we have to take steps back to start pulling some other baggage that we had buried within us that needs to be healed as well. So grief highlights just what's really in you in the moment. Make sense? Next slide. Oh, I thought you had a question. All right. Did we do the next slide? Is this the next slide, Greg? So self-care, how can we take care of ourselves emotionally? We want to express our feelings. Start talking about how you feel. When somebody say, hey, how's it going? Talk about it. Don't say that the line that we use sometimes, I'm good. Talk about it. Like, let's be able to explain, like, hey, now I'm having a bad day. I woke up thinking about my loved one, and it really has set me back. Begin to verbalize what you actually feel in those moments. That's good self-care. And ask for help and accept it. There's so many times you have sent out that text, hey, I'm here if you need me. Hey, accept it. Hey, I need you. Can we get a coffee? Can we go out for a walk or something? Ask for that help that you need. Don't let anyone tell you how to feel, and don't tell yourself how you should feel. We always push ourselves to get out of the place of grief. We don't want to stay in there too long, so we push ourselves out. We'll make ourselves feel okay when we're not okay. It's okay to not be okay. We got to normalize that so we can not push ourselves past the time that we're supposed to be grieving. Be patient. Be kind to yourself. Start investigating your emotions and express your truth. Memories are good. What did you learn from this person? What are some good things about these persons? Start thinking of the good things and not just resting on the fact of the reality that that person is not here. I cannot change it, but I can impact how it continues to impact me. You cannot change that you lost your person, but I can change how it affects me every day. I can choose every day how it impacts me. Next slide. Psychologically, when you are going through grieving, your mind is flooded. There's so much emotion. You're on a roller coaster. You're going up and down. What you have to do is start writing things down so you can remember the things that you're actually needing to do and the things that actually is happening within you. Start writing things down. Simplify your life. Don't make it hard. Don't start on a new adventure. Don't go out here and build something just to distract yourself. Deal with your pain and then build. But make sure you're simplifying your life during that time. Set short-term goals for yourself. Hey, I got up this morning, I took a shower, I went to work. That's a short-term goal, just small. Keep it small, keep it simple. Distract, engage in pleasurable activities. You want to distract, you want to engage, but you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to be avoiding the pain within you by doing something all the time. So take it with good measure. Say, okay, I'm going to go out and do this right here, and I'm going to have fun. But if the next day you're having a bad day, let's sit in it. Let's examine what's actually happening within us instead of running from that place. Oftentimes we run from our pain because we don't want to sit with our thoughts. We don't want to sit with our emotions. Don't allow yourself to run in those moments. Start writing the next chapter of your story. How you want your life to look now? Outside of my life now, I lost my loved one. How do I want my next chapter to look? Start thinking, start making plans. Plan ahead of grief triggers to prevent from getting stuck. If you know going to certain places causes you to have a setback, maybe in the beginning that we're going to have to avoid some places because I don't want to have that setback. You want to make sure you're setting yourself up for success. Next slide. Physically, get plenty of rest. Internally, your body is fighting. It's constantly fighting, so you need plenty of rest so you can fight emotionally what you're enduring. So rest will help you recover. Learn how to handle being physically alone with your thoughts. You cannot run from your thoughts. We cannot hide from our thoughts. We can't hide from our emotions. So learn how to sit with those things. Exercise. Exercise is a good one because what exercise does, we have memories within our body. So the more movement we have within our body, we're bringing up those memories out of our body so we're able to deal with it. Stored memories get locked in our body. So if we had experienced any form of trauma, it gets locked in our bodies. The more we exercise, the more we move, it pops that stuff out. Avoid alcohol and drugs. You do not want to self-medicate during that time. However, in the beginning, if you go to your doctor and you tell them that you've lost somebody, they will prescribe you a medication to help you in the beginning. We don't want you to get dependent upon that. Because in the beginning, that helps you through the process of having to deal with a funeral, having to deal with all what comes with having to bury your loved one. But we don't want you to be dependent on it. In the beginning, it's probably going to be good for you to be able to face the things you have to face, but you don't want to slowly move away from that and not be dependent on it. But alcohol and other like illicit drugs, you want to totally avoid because it only creates another problem on top of the other problem. Pay attention to persistent changes in eating, sleeping, mood, or energy level. If you're eating in a way that you're overeating or you're not eating, you want to pay attention to that and not necessarily start doing things that will cause you to have another setback. Sickness takes place in those moments, and you want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Sleeping, make sure you get on a good regimen for sleeping, mood, and energy levels. Keep those things up. Next slide. I'm like killing myself over here. Spiritually, prayer. That's going to be a big one for you because the more you stay in communication with God, you're going to be able to feel stronger quicker. Because as you cry out in your distress, He's going to answer you. But if you're not in communication with God, you're setting yourself up to be totally dependent on yourself to pull you out. And you can't be totally dependent on yourself because you can't pull yourself out of something like this. And reading scripture is going to be good. Books, making sure you're getting the word in you, because the more the word you get in you, the more it's going to separate some of the pain that you're actually experiencing. And meditation, thinking about like the scripture that you read, meditate it. Keep it in your mind, keep it in your heart. Like if you have a scripture like, He's close to the broken, I will repeat it. He's close to the brokenhearted. He heals my wound. Constantly repeating that, keeping that within you so you're making sure that you're eating on that constantly. And this is a big one. Community. You do not need to isolate yourself. You need people around you that can push you out of the place that you're in. So you're going to have to get into a good, healthy community. Church is really good. You want to make sure you're around people that are positive, that are uplifting during that time. Next slide. All right, this is the reset technique. This technique really works if you work it. The reset technique is one, you recognize. You have to know thyself. And you recognize what I'm carrying. What is actually happening within me? You constantly are pouring out in your mind what's going on, making yourself self-aware of what I'm actually carrying. You ask for help. You develop a sense of to know your emotional state on a day-to-day basis. It's self-checking in. So recognizing is really big. It resets you, gets you out of the place of being stuck. The next one is release. Acknowledge the reality of your loss. What did you lose? Acknowledge that. If you lost, identify it by words. I lost a friend, so that you lost a friend, you want to be able to really release that. Casting that out, casting your cares out, not necessarily getting into the place where you're holding that stuff in. In this stage of release and the reset technique, if you keep stuff in, the more you'll be stuck. So we want to constantly pour out, constantly release the things that need to be released. Don't suppress emotions. That's really big. The more you suppress, it pushes you back and not lead you forward. You can appear that you're moving forward when you're not releasing, but you're appearing that way until it just hits you one day and knocks you out. So that's going to be a really good strategy for you. The next one is reframing. Change your mind. Change the way you're thinking. Your thinking must shift. You cannot think the way you used to think, or you'll stay in the place that you used to be. You have to shift your thinking to a place that causes you to move beyond your current reality. Your current reality is not the end. It's just the place that you're in right now. Remember, my current reality is not the end. It's in the place that I am right now. So you have to make changes so you can stay in the place that you want to be, re-envisioning life. How do I want my life to look now? You start planning ahead, start thinking, how can I move forward? Rebuilding is the last one. Discover your purpose. You were given a purpose that was not necessarily attached to that person. So if that person is not here, does not mean there's an end to you. You can still live out your purpose, but you are gifted the responsibility to find out what that purpose is and run with it. Your purpose is in you, and you have to be able to discover it. So in the rebuilding, it's a time that we get into this place that we start dealing with that underlying stuff. No more hiding, no more keeping stuff in secret, no more suffering in silence. We rebuild. We take this stuff up and really begin to rebuild our lives. And you have to learn how to fight. This is an important thing because you're going to feel the symptoms of depression. You're going to feel lack of motivation. You're going to feel the sadness. You're going to feel helpless. But you have to learn how to fight against those things by utilizing the techniques we're talking about, by prayer, by using people around you so they can push you out of that place. If you don't learn how to fight, you will remain in that place and you will stay stuck. So you're fighting against depression and you're fighting against oppression. Oppression comes to it opposes itself against you. So you have to learn how to fight. And you want to integrate your faith to build yourself up. Integrate your faith to build yourself up. It's important that your faith be a source of your foundation, because what you're building on will be the contingent if it's going to be able to make it. If you're not building on good ground, it won't sustain. You want to build yourself so I could be held up and supported in this time. One of the things you have to remember in the process is there's an expiration to the depth of the pain that I'm experiencing. It will soften. It won't go away because now it's a hold in my soul. But I have to begin to start moving through the process